Welcome to ELT in Chile, a podcast about teaching English in Chile and now teaching English online. I'm Daniel Gwim.
And I'm José Luis Colete. In today's episode, we're having a conversation with Carlos Velozo, university professor and researcher. Carlos Velozo is a coordinator of English language courses for professional programs at IP EATRI, Chile, and also an adjunct professor at the Department of Linguistics and Literature at the Universidad de Santiago de Chile. He holds an MA in teaching for higher education and is currently enrolled in a master's program in EFL. His research interests include translator identity and B language teaching and learning, and in translator education. He's currently a researcher at the EIPT research group, which studies B language teaching and translation programs in Chile.
Welcome to the podcast, Carlos. Thanks for coming here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me and for believing that I have something interesting to say.
We do believe that.
Yes. So before we start with the interview, if you are listening to this episode, you can watch the video episode on our website and also on our YouTube channel.
So I would like to thank Carlos for taking the time for being here with us. And of course, we really value your input and also your experience. So let's start with the conversation. So let's say we have some different types of questions. Some of them, let's say, related to your, teaching background, and of course your experiences learning English. So I think that's one of the first things that that come to mind. So Carlos, can you tell us what was your experience with English like growing up? How did you learn English, or things like that in general?
Well, as a kid, I always liked English because my mother had this like for English too. She was always listening to music in English. I had English from the very first level in school, like first year primary school. I had English, and I always liked it. It was always easy for me. And then, of course, especially with music, I started, trying to sing all the songs that I liked, translating a little bit. So I always liked it, right? So it became easy for me to pick it up. And I also had all this family background of encouraging the learning of English, especially. Actually, my siblings also have this like for English, and it seems to be easy for them to learn it. So I don't know if it's part of the family background in general, but we seem to like it. So it was easier to learn it. There was motivation.
So it sounds like you had a very encouraging household, and one thing that they really valued was learning English. That was something that was encouraged and seen as a positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also, let's say there is a really strong connection between, let's say, either music, or books or video games, and that really encourages people to learn the language, especially when we are, let's say, kids, or when we are young, so there is, or movies at least. So there is some sort of connection like that.
So I actually have a question for you about learning English, because back in the day, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have Spotify, we didn't have a lot of the technology and things that we have. So what were the things that you did to learn English? Like, did you have a notebook where you kept track of vocabulary, or did you read books in addition to listening to music?
In general, it was getting the lyrics from the cassettes and CDs, getting a dictionary, and doing it the old way, like the analog process.
Look at that.
Later on, there was access to lyrics online. There was access to other kinds of online dictionaries. But in general, it was like that. It was listening, repeating the song, along with Sac de la Rocha especially. But the translation process, in order to understand what he was saying, was basically taking the cassette or the CD and a dictionary next to you, right? Not necessarily writing the translation, but more like understanding the point, right? That's what I did. But later on, it became easier and easier with the technology, right?
Excellent.
well, I remember watching movies with subtitles, and every time you watch the movie, subtitles became less and less necessary. So I would watch the same movie 5 times, and then you were able to watch it without the subtitles, or maybe you would switch to English subtitles sometimes, so you would get both, right? My brother recorded movies for me for a VCR, and I asked him especially to do it with English subtitles, for example. So I had some movies like The Godfather or Dracula or Snatch, things like that, with English subtitles, but then they were not necessary because you would already know what they were saying.
So,
it was a longer process, but in the end, rather effective.
That's so interesting because, I mean, when I think back to learning Spanish and learning German, I think for me, I had a difficult time finding, audio and finding video and stuff in those languages. But, I had classes in school and things and in university. And I remember I had like a notebook. And then when I had a reading, I would just write down the words, look up the translation. I had Langenscheid's dictionary in Spanish and in German. And it was, just very, very old school, just, going ahead, translating and, putting things together. So I think the technology has really helped us and made things a lot easier.
But do you think Daniel and Carlos, like maybe, because I think we all had a similar experience. I remember when I used to play video games, and most of the games I could find for my PlayStation 1 back in the day, they were all only either in English and Japanese, of course. And I said, like, I have to choose which version, but it was a similar process, writing, words down and then going to a dictionary, or like Carlos said, maybe playing the game with the dictionary right next to me. But I think, let's say, in that way, that process, I don't know if it made it difficult, but I think it made it more meaningful because, we had to really, let's say, commit ourselves to, to let's say, learning if I really wanted to understand what was going on, especially, let's say, in dialogues, in like cutscenes and things like that.
Definitely. I think that for me, writing things down is a way that helps me learn things and retain things. And then if I'm studying something, I'll take my notes and then I'll rewrite my notes, but only what I consider essential. It sounds like, Carlos, you learned pretty well through auditory and visual without really having to write things down. So I think that's interesting. Sounds like our learning style is a little bit different.
Yeah, but also, apart from that, I think that I developed this habit to do my own research before asking anyone, because it's very common to have students who immediately ask the teacher, what does this mean, right? Instead of searching on their own, right? So I think it's a good habit to develop, right? To do your own research. And well, that's what I try to tell my students, right? That we are our best teachers. When you teach yourself, it's actually self-education is perhaps the most meaningful, right? But the habit to do the research is crucial, right?
So helping learners become autonomous, so that way they don't have to depend on teachers all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, many times I say, I don't know, search it. I don't, although I know the answer. I don't know, search it. There are dictionaries here. You have a dictionary in your pocket, right? And then I confirm or I explain something else. But first, I teach them to fish. In a way.
There you go.
Right? Very good. I don't give them fish. I teach them to fish, right?
Themselves.
It's an interesting way of explaining it.
And of course, came all the training in my years of pedagogy, right? Studying pedagogy. That's where I came to learn more of the theory behind the language. And well, I would say that I don't want to say that it was easy, but since it was something I liked, I think it became easier, right? I felt it as easier to learn, right, and to develop other skills in relation to the language, right? The teaching of the language, well, that's something else, right?
Yeah.
But yes. Yeah, in my years at USACH, right, the Universidad Católica Silva Enríquez, That's where I did all my professional training, right?
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, so what can I tell you? Well, before UCSH, I was a student at USACH in an engineering program, right? And I failed miserably. Right?
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I failed. Actually, I got expelled, plain and simple. But that was like a wake-up call, right?
Mm.
And I said, well, I've liked English all my life. What am I doing here, right? So I started with pedagogy when I was 21, rather much, I'm not going to say mature, but much more mature than when I started engineering. So it was a really conscious decision. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think I committed myself so much to that, right? And in a way, I do what I like, right? I'm doing what I love, right? Teaching is what I like doing.
Does it spark joy?
I don't know if it's actually a job. It's more like I'm getting paid for doing what I like, my hobby or so, right?
There you go. So it sparks joy in you.
Yes, of course. It does. It does. I think, I know Carlos, and I know he's an excellent teacher, and he really sparks joy. And is there something that, Carlos, that maybe that you remember from your education, from your language teaching training, that it's worth mentioning, something that, that was really, or like maybe a moment that said like, oh, this is something I would really like to do, let's say as a teacher?
Well, as I was saying, one thing is to learn the language because you like the language. And I had many classmates who entered, right, so who started the program with me because they liked English, but they didn't like teaching necessarily, right? So although I started studying pedagogy because I liked English, I, in a way, fell in love with teaching, right? Yeah. That was the process, from liking the language to liking teaching the language. Which of course are related, but for many people, they just discover they don't like teaching and they switch to something else, right? I have had a couple of students in translation programs who've told me that they were that they were studying pedagogy as well, but then they discovered that they didn't like teaching, that they weren't patient enough. Or in their first practicum, they faced 42, 45 students and got disappointed, etc. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a very common.
Has to do with what your podcast is about, right?
Yeah. I mean,
teaching English in Chile presents certain challenges.
Absolutely, I think one of them can be. I mean, I've heard that story before. Let's say from many people, that they like the language, but then they realize that they don't want to be teaching. That's why they become translators, or the other way around. That sometimes they're starting to be translators or interpreters, and then they realize that they let's say they need to also have this social element, and that's exactly something that, let's say, teaching brings.
Yeah, it also happens the other way around.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, I've seen that too.
Very good. So when we were talking before, you told me that you're actually studying a master's now. Can you tell us a little bit about the program you're in at the moment?
Sure. Well, I started in February 2019, right? And I'm supposed to finish, right, in March, right? No, I'm working on my thesis.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, it's an EFL master's program, and I think it's been refreshing because I've reviewed all the theoretical part of methodologies that I saw in my undergraduate program, right? It's also been useful because I've learned much more about the use of technology or new approaches to teaching, right? Many of which have helped me, I would say, develop in my current teaching, right? Actually, well, that's something I can tell you later on if you want, but I have been applying many of the new skills or new knowledge I have in some of my lessons, right? As different projects, etc.
And let's say, and Carlos,
it's been really interesting to do that.
Okay, and Carlos, is there like a subject that you really enjoy? You know, like that you have really enjoyed? You know, it's something, maybe a subject that you say, "Oh, this has really helped me think about my teaching." You know, in a different way.
Well, there is one especially that I'm also using in a research project, but also in my thesis, that is called Content and Language Integrated Learning, right? The acronym is CLIL, right? CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning. So it's a new approach, especially designed or conceived for immersion programs or bilingual education. For example, in Chile, we have some bilingual schools, right? Well, so it is basically a history teacher teaching history in English, or a science teacher teaching science in English, right? So I thought that was really suitable for translator education as a way to teach contents together with language, as a way to support other skills, translation-related skills, right? Translation competence, that's the concepts we use, right? And that's what I've been doing, all right? Well, in my thesis, which I'm developing much more in depth, right? And that's what we have been doing also in the research group. So I've been applying CLIL in my lessons, and especially in research projects, basically because teaching contents together with language sounds coherent in the context of translator training, right? So we've been trying to mirror the contents in the programs of translation. So we deal with those topics in the language class, right? Normally, the language class is conceived to develop 4 skills, which is all right. But in the context of translator training, I feel that the language class can also help in the development of the translator competence. So that's what I've been doing in my recent research. In my thesis, I'm doing that, right? And well, that's closely related to what we're doing with Jose Luis, right? In the research group, and with Mr. Nestor Singer as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you bring up a really good point in that if somebody is learning English as a language, you know, you have the idea of general English, but then if they're going to be learning chemistry in English, I mean, there's an entire body of language, you know, that they have to learn, you know, that they may not understand in their native language, you know, that they're now learning in another language. And I think that takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of work to design curriculum, to teach those type of things in a way that students can understand. So I think that, you know, that requires training in and of itself. And I imagine the translators also will specialize in areas. So maybe some translators specialize in law, maybe some of them specialize in mining, engineering, and things like that. And I think that maybe that's something that ties in where they start to specialize a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is also something else that maybe we can talk about, let's say the context of translator education here in Chile. You know, that in some other countries, I mean, I had the experience of, studying in Europe. And I think, Carlos, you also had the experience of a semester abroad in Sweden, if I'm not mistaken. The experience of, like people learning. I mean, when people, let's say, do a master's degree there in Europe, they are not learning the language, they're just learning the skills. But, in Latin America, I feel like, especially, let's say, the context that we both, like, we're all, let's say, immersed in, people are learning the language, let's say, with the skills. So it's like this context makes it really special, because we have to develop in a way like linguistic skills and also translation skills at the same time. So that's why, let's say, the training and also the lessons that we need to give our students are, in a way, they are kind of like clear, let's say, related, and also like English for specific purposes combined with general English, so everything is combined.
True, that's true. So I do believe that the teaching of the language for translators or interpreters should be more specific, right? Because, well, in my experience as a teacher, I have worked in different institutions that offer English with completely different purposes. For example, I could talk about DUOC, which offers a general program, and the objective is, to develop conversational skills. We don't pay much attention to grammar, to grammatical accuracy. As long as the communication takes place, all mistakes are acceptable, right? As I said, if you get your point across, you can accept, right, anything. On the other hand, right, I've worked at UNIAC, for example, in a translation program, USACH currently, and, well, most of my teaching career at EATRI. Yes, communication is not enough. Accuracy is important, right? So, well, I guess we're moving towards this this English for specific purposes, right? In those programs, which might sound old-fashioned, right? But, well, perhaps it's what they need, right? So that's why we're doing research in the field, right?
I mean, I think that's really necessary. And I mean, it makes me think back to the United States when I was in a teacher training program. And so you have to get your teaching credential for science, or, for a language, or for math. So I was talking with someone, and they told me that back in the day in the United States, you got a teaching credential for either elementary school or high school. And then you would be teaching science, or you could be teaching music or history, and you didn't have that specialization. So that seems crazy to me that that's the way the system used to be. And so to me, it seems like it makes sense for people to have a specialization within, translation. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like Carlos said, I think this is where education is moving towards. We need to have this sort of. I mean, it's. I think we see that when it comes to teaching, but when it comes to translation, I think this is slowly going in that direction. That this is not just, let's say, linguistic skills, but also, let's say, research skills. Like social skills. Like being able to negotiate a contract, being able to, of course, let's say, use the language appropriately and correctly in order to, let's say, translate, and also research skills, like if you want to specialize in an area, like Daniel, like you said, maybe legal, or like maybe in the medical sciences, or let's say mining. So this requires, like a set of skills. And also,
that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carlos, well, you mentioned some research. So can you tell us a bit about your research? And do you think that your research has also shaped the way that you teach, or has it helped you develop, or maybe look at your teaching style differently?
I would say that my teaching style, or something like that, if I have one, has been shaped mainly by my teaching career along the way. When I started at EATRI, I was terrified because I didn't know what to do with my students. But then I started to understand that language was serving a different purpose, right? That it's a means to an end, right? So, well, I started developing certain ideas in relation to what translators and interpreters needed. Okay, the different, the emphasis in different areas was different. Okay, but now with research, I'm making it more systematic, more informed, right? More theoretically supported in a way, right? So many of the ideas I had now are confirmed, okay? So I always said you cannot teach a translator the same way you're teaching, I don't know, an engineer, the same English, I mean, right? But now I have like a theoretical background supporting those ideas. And in relation to research, well, it depends on what we're doing, because with this CLIL project we've been doing, well, that has helped me develop my skills to create material. In general, we rely on textbooks, right? But creating your own material, I would say, is much better. It might be more time consuming, but it pays off in the end, because you're choosing up-to-date material. You're choosing also to use authentic language, right? Authentic audios. So it makes it more real, more up-to-date, because I have some textbooks in which Josh Stone and Christopher Paolini are still teenagers, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Or Shirley Temple is still alive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I remember, that makes me think back when I was teaching class about 6 or so years ago, and I wasn't as prepared as I usually was. And so I took a look at the unit, and the unit was about heroes. And so what I did with the students was we brainstormed who they considered a hero. And, so there were people that said like Jesus, Gandhi, Muhammad Ali, different people. And so then I said, all right, well, now we're going to open the book. We're going to read about heroes. And then we read about Lance Armstrong.
And how did you deal with that, Daniel? Because after, probably, he lost all of his prizes and awards and things like that. So how did you deal with that?
Yeah, and his credibility, And so, we read, and I said, well, this is a lesson that we see the textbooks are not always up to date, and it's a shame, because I think we could have had a really, really rich conversation about that, but they were elementary level students.
Yeah.
So, we couldn't have really had that conversation in English, but I think that things like that do allow for teachable moments. Sticking to a textbook all the time isn't always the best. Obviously incorporating, authentic materials like what you talked about. I think particularly for translators and interpreters, that has to be really valuable with current events and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that now we have access to those things. And Carlos and I, we both work teaching the same program at the Universidad de Santiago, and that's why we don't like using textbooks so much. Sometimes we take things from textbooks, but we usually choose articles. Like for example, I've been using things from websites like NPR, like news related to linguistics, like podcasts and things like that, because they allow for, let's say, to have discussions, like you said, Daniel, of current affairs, and also, let's say, they have really up-to-date language, because sometimes there are words that appear there that, let's say, people are not using anymore because language changes so fast. And also, we all know what happened last year in let's say 2020 with COVID-19. And I think Daniel, Carlos, and myself, we had to adapt, to a new, let's say, teaching context. So, Carlos, I don't know if you would like to maybe make a comparison between both teaching contexts, like what your previous teaching context was and what your current teaching context is. Maybe we would like to make a parallel.
Well, it is difficult to compare, right? The easiest thing to do is to say that I would stick to face-to-face lessons, because online lessons were this, and that, right? But well, I believe that the main differences have to do with the way you interact with your students. Of course, you do most of the talking, right? I tend to think that what we had this year, more than online education, was face-to-face through the camera, because it wasn't really online education. I've been an online student a couple of times, and it's been completely different, right? In the first place, all my lessons were synchronous, right? And online education is not necessarily synchronous 100%, right? You give the student much more autonomy. You have you can control certain aspects of the process, but not everything, right? You have to learn to let go, as Yoda said, right? Because well, I think there are pros and cons. The problem is that since we were not prepared at all to do this, I feel that the first semester online was trial and error. My second semester was much better. But I feel I need another one to say, okay, now it's perfect. Now it's everything I wanted from an online course, right?
Definitely.
But with a different perspective. I cannot compare it to anything I've done because it's the first time I do it, right? So I think I need another chance to make it
Definitely.
better, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that when we as educators think of online courses, we typically think of, okay, it's already laid out. There are modules, there are videos, there are assigned readings. You have an area where you leave comments, and people will leave a comment and someone will respond to that. And you have this really rich conversation online, which is not happening in the actual time when you're connecting live, with other students and things. So, I mean, I think that's what we think of when we think of an online course. But it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of planning to create something like that. And we just didn't have the notice. We didn't have, the notice. And I think we didn't really necessarily have the skills to be able to construct something like that.
Yeah, because I mean, there are some technical aspects that maybe we're not really prepared for. And I think, like the capability of, let's say, creating materials, creating content, and also, let's say, have them online, for students to watch later, or like, some assigned reading. I mean, we, in the translation program that we both work at, like Carlos and I, we usually have, let's say, a meeting because, let's say, we let's say, know each other. And then we, let's say, tend to say, okay, these are going to be like the main 4 topics of this semester. And then we start looking for, let's say, reading. But that's something that we do because, let's say, in a way, we want our students to have like a good, learning experience. But, I mean, imagine doing that for an online course. This would require months. I mean, at least a month of planning, creating the materials, and then, let's say, having a reliable platform to put things on, and then, having all the rights to everything, copyright, and things like that. So I think this requires a lot of effort. So maybe Carlos was saying, you said like face-to-face lessons done, let's say, through a camera. Lots of people call this like emergency education, basically, like emergency online sessions, because,
Interesting.
Because it was not teaching. It was basically like trying, to use all we had, and with that, trying to teach a class, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it was an emergency. We had to resort to what we had, and we had to learn to use it on the way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But, well, here, I think that some other teachers might have a different opinion, depending on the subjects they taught, right? I have a colleague who teaches translation, and for him, this was the ideal scenario, for example, right?
Yeah. And Carlos, why?
It was the ideal scenario.
Why do you think it was different, let's say, for him? I mean, why would you think it was so good to teach translation?
Well,
and
the first
different
place,
from, let's say, language.
Sure. Look, well, for a translator to have access to online sources of information, to actually translate using a computer, to be able to share glossaries, etc. It's a huge advantage, right? That's not something they can do face-to-face because, in the first place, translation is not necessarily taught on computers.
Yeah.
Right? If we talk about EATRI, which is where I work mainly, or most of my teaching hours are there, students have access to computers. I think like in the second year of translation, which is the fifth semester or so. Well, the thing is that they don't start translating with computers. They start with pen and paper, right? Using dictionaries like old style. So for some teachers, it was an advantage to have the platforms available for all the materials, for all the sources, etc. Whereas in the language class, where we're supposed to develop 4 scales, things, and with shorter lessons, because we only had 1 hour, like 60-minute lessons, not 90-minute lessons, of course it became harder, right? So, well, as I said, I do believe that there are advantages that I still don't know in this format and learning, right? I mean, comparing 15 years of experience with 1 year of online experience, I don't think it's fair, right?
Yeah. I mean, I can't say for sure, but I imagine maybe one advantage is the ability to share a screen, and all your students are like the same distance away, so to say. So you don't have to worry about students sitting in the back that have trouble seeing what you're showing. I think in the same way we talked about in another episode about one of the advantages of teaching online is that if I am going to practice pronunciation with students, they can all see my face at the same distance, to see the movements I'm making with my mouth. So maybe something like that is an advantage. And I think just having the internet and having so many things just right away available on your computer that you can share.
That's true. That's an advantage that we have to learn to appreciate, right? And of course, we have to take advantage of those elements, right? So you see, it's like it was so overwhelming at the beginning that we couldn't see it. But now, as I said, perhaps my next semester is going to be much better than the one before, and so on. Well, that's the idea, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I wouldn't discard this online experience right away. No, I think we need to chew it a little, right? Process it a little, and make the most of it. Definitely.
Yeah, and I think, well, that's a very good point, Carlos, because, well, online education is here to stay. I don't think it's going to go away. Many people are talking about, let's say, blended programs or like mixed programs or hybrid programs. Some courses can be.
That's the way.
Yeah, it can be taught, let's say, online. Some of them you have to go to campus and things like that. So I think this is going to really change. And I think, well, Danny, you made a really good point when you can see, let's say, students all at the same time in a way. Like you can see who's connected or who's online, who's not online. Let's say in a way, like many teachers complain that, and also it's something that you mentioned, Carlos, that we teachers do most of the talking, and we have to, in a way, like force students to interact with each other or participate. Yeah. I don't know if that's something that happened to you in class or.
Well, yeah, at the beginning it was really frustrating because it was really easy for a student to say, "Teacher, my microphone is not working," right? What can you do about it? Right?
Yeah.
So, well, of course, that didn't happen with everyone, but there were some specific groups that were rather reluctant to speak, to give an opinion, to participate. The second semester, I told them, okay, if you do not access the platform with a microphone, don't bother to attend the class, right? Mm-hmm. So that might sound like threatening, but I think that's what I did in a way. right?
Yeah.
And I think it worked. Unfortunately, it worked, right? So you're with adults. You're working with adults who are supposedly motivated to learn because they want a degree, and this is what they chose. And they were not making an effort, apparently. So I forced them to speak, and they spoke. So, well,
there you go.
At least it worked, right?
I mean, I think that's one thing that we see, and I don't think it's just in Chile. I think in the United States, if you say, okay, well, these are going to be the rules, this is what you're going to do, and if you're too polite about it, students kind of pick up on that. But if you say, okay, you're going to do this in this classroom, you're going to do this, and you're going to do that. These are the expectations. So you don't have to be nasty, you don't have to be mean. No. But if you say it in a matter-of-fact way and an assertive way, I think that students see, okay, this person means business. You can't mess around, and I think that's something that's really, really necessary in a university setting, in a school setting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we set rules when we are, let's say, in face-to-face lessons. So we also, I think I agree with Carlos, the first semester was very difficult. The second semester, I feel it was much better. And now that the next one, let's say, the academic year starts here in Chile in 2021 in March, let's say this year. So I think let's say most teachers I know are already thinking about that, let's say, semester, in terms of a schedule, in terms of planning, in terms of okay, how can I improve my teaching, And also I think everybody understands that online education is here to stay. So we really need to look at the way we teach from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. So sometimes, perhaps with adults, we take things for granted, right? You're supposed to be motivated, you're supposed to participate, but no. Yeah, I think it's a good idea to set a couple of rules. Okay, for this class, you're expected to be like this, to act like this, to participate.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. I'm going to do that.
Yeah, and I don't know if I don't know if this happens to you, Carlos, maybe, and of course to you, Daniel. But when we finish a class, that's the moment when, I've read this a few times, that's the moment where students express when they express, their thoughts the most, when they say bye. It's bye, teacher, bye, and bye, you hear bye, thank you. You hear a chorus, of students saying that, and I think in a way, students express their appreciation in class. And I think, let's say, with students who attend online lessons, some of them, let's say, interact. And at the beginning, I think everybody was a little shy. But now I feel that in the second semester, like Carlos said, students have tended, let's say, to participate more because they know that that's the only way that they can actually, let's say, learn. It's not because otherwise feels like they are just watching a YouTube video or they're watching a movie. So they see that they need to participate, and they have appreciated online teaching and also the work that we've been doing more.
I think one thing that happens with this, so my observation as being an outsider here in Chile, is that I believe that for the most part, Chileans are a little fearful of change. They kind of like sticking with what they know. So I think maybe in the beginning, they were a little distrustful of online teaching. It was something new. They didn't like it. And I think as teachers got more used to it, they got to see, okay, we can use breakout rooms. We can do these different activities to get students speaking. So I think that the combination of teachers becoming more familiar with the technology, as well as students also feeling more comfortable, I think that maybe those two things came together to make online learning more successful, particularly with getting students speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that, let's say, teachers complained a lot about that. But I think in a way that's something that Carlos also mentioned, how can we make students, let's say, talk? I mean, you can do that, Daniel and Carlos, you said that, maybe you can set some rules, right? But also, let's say you need to create, let's say, the space. I've been using breakout rooms, and also maybe, you don't have to turn on your camera, but at least you have to try, talk to me and also to your classmates, because otherwise, I see no point in you being here. When we had to say those things, let's say, in order to make students participate a little more.
And I think that one thing that can be done, because I think for some students the effective filter is so high for them that they're so terrified of making a mistake that it's very difficult for them to. I had a student who could not even in the first class say yes or no when I started with her as an adult. And I was asking her yes, no questions, and she either nodded her head, or shook her head. And so I think that as teachers, we need to be sensitive to that. So I think things like letting students record a video to send to the teacher that only the teacher will see, or, letting students send a WhatsApp message, an audio message, possibly as a way of, evaluating their speaking, And I think that we have these tools with technology, and I think that we do need to be cognizant of those things. And I think it can be done, but I don't think it's a good idea to throw a student in and say, all right, everyone's going to give a 2-minute monologue for class next week in front of everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we also need to give, let's say, student different, tools, Carlos, like maybe give a presentation, or some students are really good at writing. I mean, you can see that right away when people write a research project or an essay, right? And that's something we usually do as evaluations with Carlos, either sometimes like we ask our students to write. And I think that transitions very well with the next question. Carlos, well, you've taught English in translation programs and also, let's say, in other contexts. So what differences do you see, let's say, in teaching English in a translation program and, let's say, teaching English in other contexts, let's say, teachers or at school,
Well, I think it has to do with the level of specificity of let's say, the contents you want to teach, for example. The focus on grammatical accuracy, pronunciation tips, right? The depth, let's say, of the depth and the amount of contents you deal with. I think that's the main difference, right? In translation programs, it is much more intense and much more demanding for the teacher. The teacher has to be prepared, let's say, for a question such as, sir, but this article, should it be there or not, right? Right? Is it people or the people? Things like that. Things that you would never worry about in courses that are more general and more conversational, right? If one kid tells me she liked the animals, I'm gonna give her a 7, right? In a different context, but well, in another one I would say, okay, first it is she likes, and if it's since it is a general concept, you only say animals and things like that, right? Definitely. So I think that has to do with both form, right, with grammatical accuracy and also the accuracy in the use of vocabulary, right? It has to be much more precise in translation programs, right?
And I mean, I think that this carries over to a lot of situations where we don't realize it until somebody makes a mistake. And I remember reading something where if you're at a funeral, the appropriate thing to say is, I'm sorry. You don't say, at a funeral, you do not say, I apologize.
No.
Because if you apologize, that's suggesting that you are guilty, that you're responsible for something.
Yeah.
But, that's such a small difference.
Yeah.
In that context, it becomes very, very clear that that's not appropriate, and that you do have a difference between those two words, but they are synonyms in a lot of situations. I'm sorry I did that. I apologize for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I mean, that's something that, let's say, that we, in the context of, let's say, teaching translation, also, let's say, writing is a key, skill, and let's say, well, in my experience as maybe, I don't know if Carlos agrees, that's one of the most difficult skills to, let's say, develop in this academic context, because we're not really used to writing, and I think that's something that I think that's also a key difference. I don't know if you agree with that, Carlos.
Absolutely. And well, in a general course, maybe you're going to teach students to write an email or messages, short messages, a letter, something more communicative. But yeah, in translation programs, we deal with other kinds of texts, right? reports, proposals, essays, of course. I don't know, reviews, and well, so there is a wider variety of text types, and well, it also has to do with the kind of texts they're going to see in the future, right? As translators, right? There's also much more emphasis on register. And well, together with register, formal structures. I mean, in a conversation course, I don't think you're going to talk about stylistic inversion, right?
Or let's say,
I don't think you're going to do that.
Yeah, or let's say transitions, or a research project, and things like that. So yeah, I think that's very important to understand.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, those are perhaps the main differences, right? The depth and the amount of contents, right? That's what I would say about teaching in general programs and translation programs. Those are the main differences I see, right?
So I actually have another question.
And perhaps, you know what? If you allow me to add one more thing, right? One more thing. I think that the students, right, are also more motivated, right?
In translation programs?
I have dealt with, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Because they like the language, right? In other general courses, they don't necessarily like English, so they are there because they have to. So this is part of the curriculum, so I have to pass this course no matter what. And you see it in their faces. Then when you say hello, good afternoon, and they look at you like saying, "No hablo inglés," right? So yeah, it's a factor, I would say, that also motivates the teacher, right? Yeah. I stopped working in general programs when I lost the motivation. I love teaching, right? But I also like my students to like learning.
Yeah.
Right. But if there was no communication in there, it's frustrating in a way, right? So I feel that I have a lot to teach and a lot to give, but if my students don't want to receive it, it's kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
So I would say that teaching English to people who really want to learn it in all its dimensions is much more encouraging for teachers to keep learning, to keep improving. And well, that's why I always say that I still like teaching, right?
So I think that leads us nicely to our next question. And so we do face these challenges, and we're typically only one teacher in a room at a time. So how can we develop community? How can we get teachers to interact with each other, to share ideas? Is it a good idea? Do teachers have time to do so? When should they do so? What do you think, Carlos?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's a very good question, right? I've always seen teachers as lone rangers, right? They close the door and they are in charge of their lesson. They finish the lesson and it's over, right? No one knows what's going on in there. Sometimes you get your class observed by a supervisor. They give you some feedback, right? That's positive. But meeting as colleagues, as equals, does not always happen. Or if it happens, I don't know if it has the results that we expect, right? I think it is really important that teachers get together, not only to share ideas, to share materials, but also to give each other feedback, right? Normally I share material with colleagues, but I never know how they worked, right? It's like I give them a flash drive with information, and I don't know if they used it. I don't know how they used it. I don't know if they improved it. It's like we share. There are many ways to share material: email, drives, flash drives, etc., or the cloud. So that happens. What does not happen is a discussion of the results of that, right? Or how to improve our practice. And well, do we have the time to do that? Maybe some of us do. Maybe some of us don't. And I don't know if the institutions really want to invest on that. If they want to pay teachers the extra hour for them to meet weekly, right?
Yeah.
If you do it once a semester, you end up with a catharsis, but not really a meeting to improve teaching, right?
Yeah,
All
I think
you
you
have
brought
is
up.
a moment of catharsis, right?
Yeah, and I think that you bring up a good point in that. I mean, I think sometimes when teachers meet, it can kind of turn into a quite negative discussion, a complaint about things like that. I would say not all institutes, not all universities, not all schools necessarily have, a positive working atmosphere, to say the least. So it can be quite difficult to be in that situation. But I think if you are able to connect with people that are positive, that do want to share their ideas, there's actually something that I've been going to for the past few months, an ELT lesson jam. And teachers connect from all over the world. And then we're put into groups of 3. And then a teacher shares an idea. The other 2 teachers give feedback. And the second teacher does the same thing. And the third teacher does the same thing. And it works out really nicely that you have this, this conversation. And you see how you can improve your teaching. You can see what other teachers are doing. And I think that that's something that works really, really well, because it's not just like, here, have these resources. And I've gotten things from people that I haven't even really looked at, or look at it and I say, okay, well, how am I going to use this? But then I don't really follow through. But now that I see people explaining their lessons, I think that it really makes a big difference.
That sounds like a really good idea. But like Carlos said, I think in a way, I mean, that was how we started the podcast, like having Daniel as a like-minded individual, talking about things and, having this space to discuss ideas, and in a way that, because I think we've all been there, when we have this meeting and this become, like Carlos says, like a catharsis, but a negative feeling. But the idea, let's say our idea, and I think Carlos also is part of this group, that we like to do our job in a professional way, and also having this idea of how to improve, and also connecting with other teachers, not only in a way like, we teach and then we leave, but also developing this human connection that allows us to share materials, ask each other, let's say, I have this class and it was kind of difficult. So how would you deal with this? Or, this worked very well. And that's why, let's say, people start doing research together, right? Because we find, let's say, opportunities to do things together and say, okay, so let's try to improve this. Let's say our teaching together, because by ourselves, it's actually much more difficult,
Yeah. And I mean, I think that we should also point out the fact, well, I mean, anyone that knows me or has listened to the podcast knows that I teach freelance. So I'm completely in control of my schedule, the number of students I'm teaching, the number of hours I'm teaching. So this gives me the time to do reading outside of classes, prepare personalized lessons, do projects like this podcast. But not every teacher is in that situation. I don't know that there are that many that are in that situation and also doing things to actively give back to the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's true. Yeah. And well, what you're doing is really valuable, right?
Thank you.
Valuable because, as I said, you see, we might share ideas and material, but the feedback is what makes you improve, right? Mm-hmm. That's what helps you improve. The best is to have a colleague who's on the same boat in a way.
Yeah.
Help you improve, right?
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes, I think people that are maybe in a different teaching context, they might be able to give an outsider perspective on things. I've definitely found that to be true with the ELT lesson jams. And I'll go ahead, I'll put a link to that also in the show notes if anyone does want to join or check that out.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good experience. And also, well, this year, and I think that's also something that we mentioned in our podcast, that we've been really fortunate to be part of this. We've been invited to present in different webinars. We've also, let's say, watched probably webinars, all over the world, and let's say people doing this for free. So I think it's been, let's say, 2020, I had so many bad things, but it also had, let's say, some really positive moments. And I think technology, let's say, in a way, we had to use it, let's say, to our advantage. And I think that has to do with our next question, Carlos. How do you see technology affecting translation in the future? Do you think that's going to change translation a lot, like the industry or the education that you provide, let's say, your students with?
Well, in the first place, I'm not a translator. But I do work with translators, right? My colleagues who teach translation, they're all translators. And when we talk about it, you see, there's always this fear that Google Translate is going to take over the world and translators are not going to have a job anymore, right? But I think that's wrong. That's a wrong perspective. I think that translators who are able to use technology wisely are going to replace those who don't use it wisely, right? In general, in translation, they're talking about post-editing, right? So they use automatic translation to save time, of course. But then, of course, they have this expert view on the text they are producing. And that's what makes the difference, I would say, right? The professional translator can see beyond the text, can edit it better, can get better results than a machine or than automatic translation, I would say. So I don't think it's going to affect it negatively. On the contrary, I think it's going to make it easier as long as you can do it to your advantage, right? Well, and as I said, I say this from outside because I've never translated. I mean, I've used Google Translate, but not professionally. I've used it for me, right? So now and then, okay. Although, right, if you allow me, I think that translation can also affect the way we teach, right? Because thanks to all the tools we have now, we can incorporate translation in the classroom. That's one of the subjects I've had recently in my master's program. Was the use of translation in the classroom, right? Which might seem old-fashioned at the beginning, right? When hey, are you using translation in the classroom? No, only English in my class, right? But well, this new perspective, in a way, shows you some advantages of using translation in the classroom in the English class, because what's the point? I mean, translation happens whether the teacher wants it or not. Students translate to each other, right? ¿Qué dijo el profe? Blah, 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 right? It happens all the time. Students have translators in their hands, in their cell phones. So it happens. So instead of banning it, I think you can use it to benefit the students' learning process, right? Yeah, whenever you mention translation in the classroom, people think of the good old grammar translation method, right? But no, nowadays it's much easier to incorporate it because it happens all the time, and if you can help students do it better and benefit the learning process, I think it's a good idea, right? Actually, it's perhaps one of my next projects, right? To incorporate translation in the classroom from the beginning, right? But systematically, that's the point. If you can control it, if you can systematize it, of course you can benefit from it.
And I think we just have one more question for you, Carlos, right? Is that right, Daniel?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Carlos, Would you like to continue teaching online, or would you like to go back to face-to-face lessons? Difficult question.
Well, it's a tough question, right? Well, I think I said something like this before. If I discard online teaching right away because it's been tiresome, because it's been difficult, I would have learned nothing. So I prefer to make the most of it and say, well, let's make it blended, right? Let's take the best of online teaching together with the best of face-to-face teaching, and well, let's learn more, right? I wouldn't discard it, no. And well, there are advantages, right? Advantages and disadvantages. So that's why the blended system would be the way to go from now on.
Definitely.
Yeah, although I do miss, face-to-face interaction and more spontaneous, let's say, development of a class, right?
Definitely.
I don't think we should discard it right away because it's been difficult, right? Mm-hmm. With time, it will be easier. We will have learned more. We will have a better command of the tools. So yeah, I think it's a chance to learn and to improve, right? And to reach people who maybe are in Punta Arenas, right? Mm-hmm. Or back in Arica, I don't know. So yeah, there are pros and cons, right? So
definitely,
no, I would continue online, but at the same time, some face-to-face interaction is completely necessary. So a blended system is what I would go for.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point about people being from all over and being able to teach them. So I participated in some workshops teaching students, preparing them for TOEFL. And we had students that were in Santiago. I think we had someone in Concepcion, and there was someone down in Punta Arenas, I believe. There were people in the north. So these people were connected from all over, so it was so cool, being able to connect and see them in that way. And I know, Jose Luis, you've taken at least one professional development course with Nile.
Yeah. And there were some, that was very interesting because there were teachers. I remember there was one from Ukraine, one from Russia, and one from Hong Kong. So imagine the conversations we had. They had so many questions for me. I had so many questions for them. So I think that, let's say this has also allowed for interaction with people from, let's say, many different countries. So I think, I agree with that, Carlos, as well. I mean, it would be, let's say, really unwise to discard everything that we've learned, we had experience with, let's say, last year. And I think, we will try to improve our teaching, let's say, using all the tools we know, and of course, incorporating the, let's say, new ones as well. So I think we understand that this is going to be a blended model, like a mixed model of face-to-face elements with, let's say, online elements as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I think one thing too is thinking about the purpose of each class, because if a professor is going to give a lecture for an hour and just speak to the students, is it really necessary for all the students to go to the campus, to go and sit in a lecture hall for that? Probably not. That could be something where that lecture can be recorded and put online and students can listen at their own leisure, or this could be something where if the professor can't record it online, it could be an online class where the professor is speaking and then just everyone is tuned in listening, from the comfort of their home, their dorm room, wherever. And so then when they do have those in-person classes, hopefully they're more interactive. And so I think really being mindful of that, I think would make a big difference. And, some type of hybrid model, blended model. So.
Yeah, we cannot waste the chance, I think. We cannot discard it. We have to learn, right?
I mean, it would be very, very, very unwise to do that because there are many things that we need to. I mean, we can learn from all this emergency situation, and I think, let's say, not only tools, but also the way that we've been working with our students, let's say, and also the way that they've been learning, and also the way that we've been teaching. I think everything goes hand in hand. So Daniel, I think we can, Daniel.
Yeah, I think that's the end of our questions. So that is it for this episode of ELT in Chile. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Carlos Velozo and that you are able to start out the year with your batteries recharged.
So if you have any comments or questions, you can email us at podcast@eltinchile.com. You can also visit our website, www.eltinchile.com. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So
thank you so much, Carlos, for being here with us. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for the invitation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's also interesting to get perspectives from different teachers, and of course we're going to continue doing this, right? We're going to have different guests, of course, from different contexts, and also from different countries.
Yes.
Oh.
So Daniel, stay safe, stay healthy, and keep on teaching. So that's
Bye.
Bye-bye. So thank you very much, Carlos.